This is Shiva here from Document 360 team, and it's good to have you all with us today. We truly appreciate you taking the time of your busy schedules to join us. We'll be getting started in just a moment. So, thank you all for participating. Now, I'm excited to introduce our speaker, Natalia Cloda from SAP, who is an expert in technical communication and content strategy. So, Natalia specializes in making technical documentation more engaging by leveraging psychology backed strategies to enhance information retention. And with a passion for helping writers go beyond traditional methods, she has worked extensively in transforming complex, jargon heavy content into clear, user friendly narratives. In today's session, Natalia will take us through a fresh approach to technical writing, one that moves beyond conventional documentation methods to more practical, easy to implement techniques. So, by the end of this webinar, you'll have actionable insights to improve your writing and reshape the way your audience experiences technical content. Without further ado, Natalia, over to you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Natalia Cloda. I'm a technical writer at SAP. I've been with SAP for the last 5 years. So it was my 5th anniversary last year. And throughout these 5 years, I've worked with pretty core teams, the teams that work with a pretty old code. So I think I'm quite good at making very technical content pretty easy, pretty understandable. So this is one of the things that I would like to talk about in my webinar. And before I joined SAP, I majored in translation and interpreting. And I know this is not something necessarily related to technical writing, but yeah, I definitely learn quite a lot that makes my life easier when I work as a writer. So yeah, in my webinar, I would like to, at the beginning, I would like to, as a start, like to give you a bit of an overview on what I'd like to talk about today, because the title of this webinar probably doesn't tell you much about what this webinar will actually be about. So today we'll dive into the psychology behind effective technical writing. We will explore how people process and engage with documentation. Of course, we don't have enough time to touch on everything, and we'll only discuss a few concepts and theories, but I hope you'll find them interesting and useful. And then we will touch on minimalism, and minimalism that enhances clarity. And we will also dive into the power of user-generated documentation. And we'll talk how we can use this user-generated documentation to uncover hidden insights. So let's get started. Let's start with our first item. So at the beginning, I would like to introduce to the cognitive load theory, and you will see that this theory will be relevant in quite a lot of the topics we'll discuss later. So I think it's a good introduction. So the cognitive load theory refers to the amount of mental effort that is needed to process information. Think of your brain like a computer. If you have too many processes running at once, things slow down or even crash. And the goal in documentation is to optimize that processing power so that users can learn efficiently. And we have 3 types of cognitive load. We have the intrinsic load, which is all about the natural complexity of the information of the task. And like learning how to tie your shoes is easy, but learning quantum physics is a bit more difficult. We know that some subjects are. I explained what the intrinsic load is about. So as writers, we don't get to choose what we write about. Some of the things that we need to write about are naturally more difficult, and we don't have anything. We can't do anything about the complexity of the features that we write about. But what we can do, we can help users to we can help users by reducing the mental effort that is required that from them, the mental effort that they need to put into reading. And this is where the extraneous load come into play. The extraneous load is this this unnecessary noise, but is caused by poor presentation. So this is something that can be caused by poorly structured documents, some kind of jargon used in these documents, long-winded explanations. So this is the stuff that makes users say, I don't know what this actually means. And our job is to reduce this extraneous load by providing good quality documentation. And the third type of load is the germane load, which is the good kind of effort. It's the mental work that is required to understand and to apply knowledge. It's the effort that is needed by those who are reading our documentation or just anything to understand and retain information. And this is the type of load that we want to maximize. So for us, like the job we need to do as writers is to minimize extraneous load and support germane load. So there's this balance between these three types of loads. So when the intrinsic load is high and the extraneous load is low, what we need to do as writers, we need to care about the balance between these three types of load. So when the extraneous load is low and the intrinsic load is high, so we have a document that touches on something that is pretty difficult and technical, and the document is pretty good. So like someone who's reading it is able to devote a lot of resources to processing the essential material. They're not being distracted by some unnecessary noise. But when the extraneous load increases, the germane load decreases, and learning is affected because the learner must use their working memory resources to deal with the external elements that distract them from like processing the content. So how this theory applies to technical writing? So what we can do as writers, we can break down complex concepts into smaller chunks to just basically make them more digestible. So we can use short paragraphs or bullet points. What we can do is we can also use simplified language, and by that we don't force users to decode unnecessary complexity. We can reduce this extraneous load being this poor quality of our content by removing distractions, some kind of excessive formatting, irrelevant images. What we can also do is we can use schemas, which are these mental structures within which knowledge is organized. And this is basically the structures. So I find it quite difficult to explain, but there are some kind of structures, but mental structures that already exist in our brains, in our like there already people we already have that we can use to help reduce cognitive load by ensuring that new learning is connected and integrated with pre-existing knowledge. And what we can also do, we can provide some kind of scaffolding. By that, I mean some kind of step-by-step instructions or checklists that would guide users through complex processes. Okay. Yeah, that'll be all about the cognitive load theory, but it will keep sort of reappearing in what I'll discuss later, because it will sort of be important in quite a lot of the topics I will discuss. So now I would like to proceed to scanning patterns, and I don't know if you've ever wondered how people actually read web pages or documents. Spoiler, they don't read everything, they scan. And understanding these scanning patterns helps us to create documentation that matches how people naturally absorb information. We have eye tracking studies that show that people don't read by line. Instead, they follow predictable scanning patterns when navigating content. And the two most common scanning patterns are, let's start with the first one, is the F pattern, which is how we, because we are also users, scan dense text and these longer documents. So what we do with these type of documents, we first back to the F pattern. So yeah, as I said, users, and don't worry, I'll show it in a diagram. Users first read across the top, then they scan down to the left side. They only glance at the parts in the middle text, and by doing that, they sort of form this F shape. And so the best practice that we could sort of learn from that is to put critical information in headlines, first paragraphs, and bolded keywords, so that those who scan our or just any text can very quickly get to the information they need. And this is what this pattern looks like in practice. So we read the first lines fully. Then we scan down to the left side, occasionally reading a few more words to the right. And then we go down. So we have this F pattern. And as you can see, this is more like a loaded, like a content-heavy document. And yeah, that's the F pattern. And now let's proceed to the Z pattern, which is the second type of scanning pattern. And this pattern is more common in visual content. It's like shorter type of content. So what users do, they first read across the top. Then their eyes move diagonally to the bottom left. And finally, they scan across the bottom. And we can leverage the power of this pattern by placing key content at the top left, top right, and bottom right level. And of course, we have to remember that the Z pattern is about slide web pages and kind of infographics, not about heavy documents that are heavy in content and information. So yeah, this is what it looks like in practice. So we have this Z shape. So users move their eyes in a Z shape. They start at the top left, they move to the right, then diagonally down to the bottom left, and finally to the bottom right, and they like continue doing that. And this is the pattern because we all use it, we follow on web pages with fewer blocks of text. Like we have this, like when you sign into Facebook, we have this login page. So this is the scanning pattern that we would sort of use. Like this is how we would scan information or that type of. So yeah, that's the Z pattern, and how this pattern applies to. So how these patterns apply to technical writing. So with the F pattern, I think I've already mentioned this. The F pattern is great for some kind of user manuals, knowledge bases, long form documentation. So basically, we have to remember to in our documentation to put the most important information somewhere at the top, so that those who scan can quickly get to it. And with the Z pattern, we can leverage it when we create landing pages, presentations, or some quick start guides, and this will all help those who read our documentation to get to the point quicker. And now I would like to go to the last item that I would like to discuss within the psychology of technical writing. which is this dual coding theory. And the dual coding theory is all about the way we process visual and verbal information. And the theory explains that our brains process text and visuals differently. And if we combine the two of these ways of portraying information, conveying information, we can enhance understanding and memory. So according to the theory, our brain has these two interconnected subsystems for processing information, this verbal system that handles written and spoken language, and this imaginary system that processes pictures, diagrams, and some kind of spatial information. And both these systems both independently, but they can also interact. So when we combine text with images, we activate both systems, reinforcing learning, making information easier to remember. So that's why combining text and visual is very effective. So the text alone activates only this verbal system, but image alone activates both systems. But with the images alone, we lack precise details. So it's good to combine text and images to create stronger, to enhance the way those who read anything we create, to enhance the way they process it and remember about it, they memorize it. So how this applies to technical writing, I think we all know that so it's good to pair text with minimum visuals, some kind of diagrams, screenshots, or flowcharts. It's good to use icons to reinforce concepts, some kind of like, let's say we have a warning icon that we use for some kind of critical notes. It's good to leverage color and spacing to create stronger associations, and it also use captions to explain some kind of visuals so that we can enhance understanding. So by engaging these both systems, like this text and this verbal and imaginary system, we reduce the cognitive load and make learning faster and more intuitive. Yeah, that was the last item in the psychology section, and now let's touch on the power of minimalism in documentation. And I would like to start that section with the 30% rule, which is the rule that suggests that cutting 30% of unnecessary words will not result in any meaning being lost, but will make our writing more concise and better. And this rule doesn't originate from any single academic source, but it just aligns pretty well with principles, good writing principles, from plain language writing to minimalism in technical documentation, and reducing the cognitive load, which we know is really important. And of course, it's the 30% rule, but it could be, I think, 20%. I think it depends on a document. So, what can we achieve by applying this rule to our writing? So, we reduce the cognitive load by making readers process information faster. When our content is shorter, we help users get to the point faster and get to the information that they need. Minimalism also reducing the word count, the amount of word content, eliminates redundancy and makes our content more concise, and it also improves scalability for busy users. So if our content is shorter, contain fewer words, it's easier for those who only scan it to get to the parts that actually matter to them. And And how can we apply this 30% rule to our writing? What we can do is we can write first and then edit our content, and by that we don't worry about the length of our content, the initial stages of writing. This is what I like to do when I get stuck on something. I don't dwell on. I don't. I just like to abandon that problematic part of content, and then I revisit it later, and I usually get a better, fresher perspective. We can trim filler words. So instead of saying in order to, we can just say to. And actually in my presentation, which you unfortunately can't see, like I've written down in order to, and I got these squiggly lines in PowerPoint. And PowerPoint tells me that, and I quote, more concise language would be clearer for your reader. So yes, we can also, phrases such as due to the fact that can be turned into because. We can avoid redundant phrases. Instead of saying that we've reached, there's some final outcome, we can just say outcome. We don't need that modifier. And what we can also do, we can use active voice. So instead of saying this file is saved by the system, we can just say the system saves the file. But using active voice, I think this is obvious to anyone who has any experience in being a technical writer. So I just have this one example. So instead of saying, in order to access the settings menu, you will need to click the gear icon in the top right corner. You can say, to access settings, click the gear icon in the top right. And in this change, we have a 40% reduction in word count. That's pretty substantial. Okay, and now I would like to touch on the progressive disclosure, which is this technique that I think I really enjoy using. So it's I don't know if you've ever felt too overwhelmed by too much information on a web page or a manual, and this is where progressive disclosure comes in. It's about revealing information only when it's relevant, keeping things simple and reducing the cognitive overload. The idea is to present only the most essential details first, and then offer additional information progressively. This approach aligns pretty well with how users process information, and it allows, by allowing them to focus on one step at a time, rather than bombarding them with complexity right from the start. And think about software interfaces where when you start, advanced settings are usually hidden behind some kind of more options button, or in help documentation, we sometimes have FAQ sections that expand only when clicked. These are classic examples of progressive disclosure in action. And how we can use this technique of progressive disclosure. Why it works, it prevents cognitive overload, since users focus only on what's relevant, and this guides users. By guiding users step by step, we improve learning and comprehension. As I said, we don't bombard users with information right from the start, and we also reduce, by progressively disclosing information, we reduce friction in documentation by keeping our interfaces cleaner, clean interfaces and texts cleaner. Basically, like, using this progressive disclosure technique means we make users engage. We engage users without making them feel lost or overwhelmed. And how can we apply progressive disclosure to our documentation? So we can use expandable sections, some kind of collapsible FAQs, or some learn more buttons. We can prioritize essential information first, and then offer more details if needed. We can use tooltips, Hoover text for in-depth explanations, and we can also you can break complex steps into smaller digestible sections. So basically, when next time you're designing content or some kind of interfaces, ask yourself, what does the user need to know right now? What can wait until later? Mastering this technique will lead to your documentation being clearer and more effective, actually. So as an example, for example, we could have a long API documentation with 50 something error codes, and we could put this in one table. And a better approach could be, showing these 5 or 10 most common errors up front, and then having a see more button for more advanced users for a document where you would have a bit more information on some other error codes. They're a bit that don't come up that often, at least 5, 10 most common ones. Yeah, that would be all on progressive disclosure. And now I would like to touch on, because I can only touch on the BLUF method, or a concept. And BLUF stands for bottom line upfront. And this is BLUF. It's a military communications acronym. And as I said, it stands for bottom line upfront. It's a technique that is designed to enforce speed and clarity. It's meant for emails, but I think we can use it in writing and communications in general. So the basic idea is simple. Put the most important details first. Don't tease or delay the main points, because people are busy and their time is valuable. And put the more information up front. Because some kind of life or death decisions could be made using our information. Of course, this is meant more for military communications, but I know some of us could be responsible for extractions for some kind of medical equipment. So maybe in some situations it might be very vital for someone to get the most important information from our documentation very quickly. Maybe some major decisions have to be made. Why this BLUF method technique works? Well, it aligns well with how users scan content, and as we've already discussed, since we are also users, we want to get answers fast. We don't want to go through everything to be able to get the most information from some kind of document we are reading. Why this technique also works, it also reduces frustration by getting straight to the action, which I think everyone understands. And it works well in instructions, FAQs, and troubleshooting guides. It's good to tell users what something will be all about. They can very quickly decide whether they found a document they are looking for, or maybe they need to look further. And how can we apply this to technical writing? So we can also remember to start with the key takeaways right from the start. So maybe somewhere at the bottom, we would very briefly describe what we will be discussing later. We can give users this, we can the main key takeaways could be like the first thing that is covered, so that we know we tell users what our documentation is all about. We can use bold or highlight key actions, so just to improve scalability. And we can move explanations to later sections, which I think is self-explanatory. I think we've already covered that. And we can use bullet points for clarity. So basically, next time you're designing content or interfaces, ask yourself, what does the user need to know right now, and what can wait until later? Now, being good at it will make our documentation clearer and more effective, as all the other things that we were discussing. Yeah, so for example, we could have an instruction on how to reset the password. So instead of saying, if you forget your password, go to the login page, select forgot password, enter your email, and follow the instructions in your inbox. Instead of this sentence, we could have an instruction where we would say reset your password. That's one line. Then we have a 3-point instruction: click forgot pass on the login page, enter your email, and so on. So basically improve clarity by breaking things into smaller pieces and putting the point of the instruction at the top. Okay, and that will be all on the power of minimalism. And now in the last section, I would like to discuss the secret power of user-generated documentation. So as I think it might depend on the product, but I think this will be relevant to almost all of us. It just depends on how there may be some differences. So what I mean by user-generated documentation, so what I mean by that is this invisible knowledge base that users create their own guides in. So for example, we could have community forums or Stack Overflow. Microsoft Tech Community could be an example where users who struggle with something, or just want to discuss something, come and they, raise topics they're interested in. We could have some kind of internal team wikis. For example, at SAP we use Confluence. Maybe someone uses Google Docs or Notion. We could also have some kind of user-generated documentation, just discussions in GitHub repos or some kind of open source documentation. And maybe we could also have this kind of documentation in social media threads or blog posts. And why all this matters to us? Well, this user-generated documentation provides real-world use cases and troubleshooting steps that official documentation might miss. And this type of documentation, user-generated documentation, could often be more up-to-date than official documentation. Maybe someone struggling with something, has to get rid of some error, and they are not able to find answers in the official documentation of the product they're working with. So they will just create some instruction themselves. And this user-generated documentation, what it also reveals, it shows us what the common pain points are that users experience. So we'll later on talk about how we can use it to make our documentation better. So yeah, how can we leverage this user-generated documentation? We can monitor forums or some kind of GitHub discussions to identify missing documentation topics. We could engage with power users who contribute to unofficial guides. And maybe we could incorporate frequently asked questions from these sources into our official docs. Yeah, and when it comes to user-generated documentation, we also have these shadow workflows, which are basically processes that users invent themselves. And users very often create their own shortcut scripts or undocumented processes to work around certain product limitations. And why the shadow workflows matter? They reveal gaps in the official documentation or the UI, and they show us how users actually interact with the product, not just how it's designed to be used. And this helps us identify new features that could be documented or even developed. and how we can leverage all this. This is the most important thing I think. We can interview power users to uncover undocumented workflows. We can analyze support tickets, look for some kind of repeated questions that suggest that users have hacked a solution, that they've done something that is technically like we didn't know was possible. And we could maybe host some kind of user research sessions to see how people use their product in real life scenarios, and how we can leverage all this, how we can track and incorporate these hidden insights into our official documentation. We can turn this user-generated documentation into validated, structured, and official knowledge. And why this matters? So when we incorporate this hidden insight into our documentation, we make our official documentation more relevant and user-friendly. We sort of we show those who read it that we care, and we see that something is missing in there, and we acknowledge that something maybe was missing, and maybe something should have been added. By incorporating the insight into the documentation, we also reduce reliance on unverified and outdated external sources. So by putting all the information into the official documentation, we sort of discourage users from using some other sources that we have no idea whether they should be relied on or not. And by doing all that, we strengthen the connection between writers, developers, and users. So this is my favorite part. We basically show that we care. We take someone's feedback on board. We show that we actually care about our documentation being good and useful. And we show that we listen, and we want our documentation to be good and useful. And how we can leverage all this. We could maybe set up alerts for some key discussions, depending where these discussions take place. We could maybe create some feedback loop for users, and we can create some kind of structured way for them to report issues. We could maybe have some feature that allows users to suggest topics through some kind of form. We could maybe, that I'm not a fan of this, but I could mention this, that we could maybe have some kind of unofficial insight section documentation where we would acknowledge some useful community-driven solutions that will also clarify the official documentation. So and that is actually everything that I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, thank you, Natalia. That was an insightful session, and I'm confident that our audience found it valuable as well. A huge thank you to Natalia for sharing your expertise and transforming technical writing into an engaging user centric experience. Your deep dive into the psychology of technical communication and practical strategies for making content more memorable has certainly given us all a fresh perspective on documentation. And to all the attendees, thank you for joining us today and actively participating. We hope this session has inspired you to rethink how you craft technical content, moving beyond traditional methods to create documentation that truly resonates with your users. If you'd like to revisit any part of today's discussion, the webinar recording and presentation deck will be available soon on our website. Stay tuned for the upload. We look forward to bringing you more insightful sessions in the future. Until then, keep refining, keep innovating, and keep making your writing shine. Thank you.